Men remember Gondor in its white splendor. They remember Arnor only dimly through ruins and broken names. They speak often of Mordor, for darkness that burns openly is easy to fear. But there was another kingdom, colder and more secret, raised in the north not for glory, nor for dominion as men understand it, but for ruin. Few remember it now. Fewer still understand what it was. They know the name Angmar, but often only as shadow in old chronicles, as something half legend, half nightmare. Yet Angmar was no passing terror. It was a kingdom, a patient war made into realm, a wound laid upon the north. Many tell of the fall of kings. Few tell of the power that brought them low. They speak of lost Arnor, of wandering rangers, of haunted barrows and ruined watchtowers swallowed by grass. But such endings did not arise by chance. They were made, forged, planned, and I should know, for I was there. I was the dread behind those wars, the unseen hand behind the slow undoing of kingdoms. You have heard me name the Witch King of Angmar. Hear now how Angmar rose. Hear how kings were broken. Hear how even darkness builds empires before it consumes them. For if you would understand the ruin of the north, you must begin where the shadow first gathered. Long before the northern ruins had fallen silent, before the watchtowers of Arnor stood broken against the sky, there came into the far north a shadow unlike the open malice men later associated with Mordor. It did not first appear as flame or conquest, but as a gathering darkness, cold and deliberate. Such evils are often the most dangerous, for they do not rush. They wait. In those days, the northern Dúnedain still held their divided realms, Arthedain, Cardolan, and Rudor, remnants of greater Arnor, diminished but not yet broken. Their blood was noble, their lineage ancient, yet they were no longer united. And where division enters, darker powers often perceive opportunity long before men do. It was then that the being later known as the Witch King of Angmar came into the north. Whether many knew in those first years what he truly was, I do not think so. Few would have guessed that the chief of the Nazgûl, servant of Sauron, had founded a kingdom not merely to rule, but to wage a war measured in centuries. And that is what Angmar was, not simply a realm, a weapon. Its seat was Carn Dûm, raised amid bitter northern heights, a place whose very name became associated with dread. From there, the Witch King gathered forces unlike those of ordinary kingdoms. Orcs from mountain fastnesses, cruel men drawn to dark allegiance, fell spirits, and powers harder to name. Angmar was not built upon the ordinary ambitions of men. It was founded for destruction. Yet its war did not begin in great invasions. It began more subtly, through corruption, through alliances fostered among enemies of Arnor, through the poisoning of old rivalries, most notably in Rudor, where darker influences took root and the old Dúnedain line waned. There Angmar found not merely enemies to strike, but divisions to deepen. This is often how kingdoms fall, not first by siege, by fracture. I have lived long enough to know that evil often prefers to weaken before it destroys, and so Angmar grew, year by year, war by war, winter by winter, its strength gathering while many in the south scarcely grasped the danger. There is something chilling in this when one reflects upon it. For the north did not fall in one catastrophe, but through a long pressure, as frost may split stone not by one blow but by persistence. That too was the method of Angmar, patient ruin, and yet there was power in Arnor still. The Dúnedain were not easy prey. Kings arose who resisted stoutly, alliances endured, and hope was not absent. Indeed, had the northern kingdoms remained wholly united, history might have bent another way, but division is costly. And Angmar knew how to make cost grow. Many think the Witch King chiefly a creature of terror in battle, but this mistakes him. He was strategist as much as warlord. His greatest weapon was often not brute force, but the long wearing down of resistance. There is dark intelligence in such patience. And because of it, the war that followed would not be one campaign, but generations of struggle. By the time many understood what Angmar truly threatened, much had already been set in motion. A northern kingdom of shadow stood where none had stood before. A war of attrition had begun, and the heirs of Elendil would soon learn that some enemies seek not tribute nor dominion, but extinction. Thus the long undoing of Arnor began. And to understand that undoing, one must now look into Angmar itself, into its cold strongholds, its fell armies, and the dark realm raised beneath winter skies. To understand Angmar, one must not imagine merely another kingdom among kingdoms, darker in allegiance perhaps, but otherwise much the same. It was something far stranger. Its power did not lie only in armies, nor in fortresses, nor even in the will of the Witch King of Angmar, formidable though that was. Angmar drew part of its terror from the land itself, for there are places in Middle-earth where geography seems almost to conspire with shadow, and the northern wastes were such a place. Far beyond the settled realms of men, beneath harsh mountains and long winters, lay the cold domain from which the Witch King waged his war. It was not a fertile kingdom of fields and cities such as Gondor, nor a realm of horseplains like Rohan. It was a kingdom built in desolation. Snow, rock, iron and fear were its truest architecture, and at its heart stood Carn Dûm, black citadel of the north. Many tales speak of Carn Dûm in whispers, yet few describe it. That is perhaps fitting, for places of great evil often resist clear imagining, but one may think of it as fortress and throne, war seat and sorcerer's stronghold, where the Witch King gathered not merely soldiers, but powers that made ordinary men shudder. Orcs came there from the northern mountains. Fell men bent knee there. Dark creatures, older perhaps than many would care to know, were drawn into its service. Angmar was not only a military threat, it was a realm where dread itself was cultivated, and winter served it. This is no poetic flourish. The cold was part of its power. Campaigns launched from Angmar were aided by weather that broke weaker peoples, and the harshness of those northern lands hardened those who served the Dark Kingdom. I have often thought Angmar understood how to make the very world seem hostile to its enemies. There is a reason old tales of the north carry so much frost and silence. Those things were not merely setting, they were memory. Yet the name Angmar has long carried another association, sorcery. Here one must be careful, for men too easily use that word for all they do not understand. Still, there were dark arts at work there beyond ordinary warcraft. The Witch King was no mere captain. He brought to battle dread that weakened hearts before swords crossed. His realm trafficked in terror as others in provisions. One sees traces of this later in places such as the Barrow Downs, where evil long lingered after wars had passed. Such lingering corruption is often the mark of powers not wholly natural. That too was part of Angmar's legacy, a kingdom whose shadow outlived its armies. And yet perhaps most dangerous was not any sorcery, but the discipline of purpose behind the realm. Angmar was not chaos. It had design. Its war was not random cruelty, but directed malice bent toward the destruction of the northern Dúnedain. That gave it a grim coherence many dark powers lack. I have known enemies whose hatred made them reckless. Angmar's hatred made it patient. That is worse. Imagine then the heirs of Arnor facing not raiders to be repelled, nor one campaign to survive, but a cold kingdom built over generations for their undoing. A kingdom where winter itself seemed ally, where fortresses bred dread, where the ruler did not age, and where war was pursued with tireless will. This was the foe gathering in the north, and though many still hoped the divided realms of Arnor might endure, the pressure mounted year by year. Border skirmishes grew to campaigns to wars, and soon Angmar would cease merely preparing destruction. It would begin to claim kingdoms. For shadows, once grown confident, do not remain behind mountains forever. And so the long war against Arnor truly began. When open war came between Angmar and the northern kingdoms, it did not fall all at once like thunder from a clear sky. It advanced as winter often does in harsh lands. First a chill at the edges, then frost upon the fields, and only later the full severity of the storm. Such was the manner in which the Witch King of Angmar made war. He did not strike united Arnor in its prime, for that kingdom no longer stood whole. He struck its divisions. This was no small distinction. A single strong realm may endure blows that scattered realms cannot. Thus Angmar pressed first where weakness could be widened. In Rudar, old loyalties were corrupted. Hill men hostile to the Dúnedain rose in influence, and Angmar's shadow entered not only by force but by allegiance. This was one of the darker arts of the Northern War, making enemies from within as well as without. I have often said evil prefers to divide before it destroys. Here it was plainly so. From Rudar, pressure spread against Carn Dûm and Arthedain. Raids became invasions, and what had once seemed border strife revealed itself as a sustained campaign against the heirs of Elendil. The Old North, already weakened by fragmentation, was made to spend strength on constant defense. That alone can undo kingdoms. Not always great defeat. Endless wearing, years of vigilance, the slow draining of hope. Yet the Dúnedain did not yield easily. This too must be remembered. Too often lost kingdoms are imagined feeble because they fell. Arnor was not feeble. It resisted long. Kings arose in Arthedain who fought stoutly against Angmar's malice, and alliances were sought where they could be found. The struggle was bitter because the resistance was real, but the shadow deepened. There came plague too, and this is a sorrow too often overlooked. For not all ruin in the north came by sword. Pestilence passed through lands already strained, and where kingdoms battle both war and plague, even noble endurance grows perilously tested. Carn Dûm suffered greatly, its strength waning under blows from more than one enemy. And where realms weaken, Angmar pressed harder. There is something terrible in wars, measured not in seasons but generations. Children inherit them. Old grievances harden into atmosphere. Whole peoples grow accustomed to siege as if it were nature. Such became much of the north. Watchtowers guarded roads where once merchants traveled freely. Borderlands emptied, settlements became ruins. Roads remembered by kings were known to later men only as dangerous wilderness. This too was conquest. Not banners raised over captured capitals, but life slowly driven out. Yet still Arthedain endured. And because it endured, Angmar bent increasing malice against it. The Witch King understood that while the line of western Dúnedain remained, Arnor was not wholly erased. Thus the war narrowed toward a greater purpose, the destruction of the last northern kingdom. And so battles grew larger, Sigurskrimmer, the fate of kingdoms more openly at stake. I have often thought the tragedy of Arnor is not merely that it fell, but that it resisted so long and nobly before falling. There is sorrow in lost splendor, but also grandeur. One must not forget either. For those wars in the north were not only chronicles of decline, they were epics of endurance. And they led at last toward one final contest, toward the kingdom of Arthedain standing nearly alone, toward the coming of the great northern catastrophe, toward Fornost. And there, the fate of Angmar and Arnor would be tested in full. There are cities whose stones seem made not only for defense, but for memory. Fornost was such a place. Once it had been a royal seat of Arnor, a city of kings, raised in older strength when the north still believed its glory might endure unbroken. Even in decline, it remained a symbol, and symbols are often what dark powers most desire to destroy. By the time Angmar turned its full strength against Fornost, the long wars had already worn much away. The northern Dúnedain were diminished, though not broken in spirit. Their line still held. Their memory still held. And while that endured, the purpose of the Witch King of Angmar was incomplete. Thus the war narrowed toward final reckoning. The assault upon Fornost was not merely another siege in a long campaign. It was culmination. Years of attrition, ruin, and patient malice gathered toward that hour. Angmar struck with the weight of long preparation, and the city, though stoutly defended, could not withstand alone what generations of pressure had prepared. King Arvedui, last king of Arthedain, had already faced grievous losses, and with his passing much of the old northern kingship seemed to fade into sorrow. It is one of the tragedies of Middle-earth that some noble lines do not perish in one grand final hour, but through endurance stretched beyond mortal limits. So Fornost fell, and with its fall, many believed the north broken beyond recovery. I have often thought there is a peculiar sadness in fallen capitals. When walls built for kings stand silent, they do not merely mark military defeat. They mark interruption of memory. That is what Angmar sought, not only to conquer a city, to sever inheritance, and for a brief time it seemed nearly accomplished. Yet history did not end there. This too is important, for darkness often appears strongest just before it is challenged. From the south aid came at last, and with it one of those turning points by which long histories pivot. Forces from Gondor under Prince Arnor came north, joining what remained of resistance against Angmar. Elves too were part of that reckoning, and old alliances, which Shadow had labored long to weaken, stirred once more. I have always found something deeply Tolkienian in that. When darkness grows vast, old friendships remembered become strength. Thus came the Battle of Fornost, and there, in bitter northern lands where Angmar had long spread dread, the Witch King met not helpless remnants, but a final coalition. The battle was hard fought. Such victories always are. Yet in the end, Angmar was broken, its armies scattered, its northern kingdom undone, its dark design against Arnor thwarted, though at grievous cost. And there too was spoken one of the great prophecies remembered in later ages, when Glorfindel foretold of the Witch King that he would not fall by the hand of man. Many know the fulfillment of that prophecy in another age, but its first utterance belongs here amid the ruin of Angmar. Such threads in history fascinate me, how one battle may cast meaning centuries forward. Yet though Angmar fell, Arnor did not rise again as once it had been. This is one of the bittersweet truths of victory. Evil may be defeated, and still what it ruined may not be wholly restored. The North was saved, but altered forever. Its great kingdom passed into memory. Its heirs became wandering rangers. Its capitals became ruins men later feared. And over Fornost silence slowly gathered. Grass where kings had walked. Wind through broken stone. Owls where banners once flew. I've seen such places. They do not feel empty. They feel watchful, as though history lingers there. And perhaps it does. For though Angmar perished as kingdom, its shadow left traces long after. Ruins remained. Barrows darkened. Old roads grew haunted. And the North became a land where memory and desolation often walked together. Yet in that too lies strange beauty, for ruined kingdoms still speak. And if one would understand the North after Angmar, one must walk among those remnants, among lost towers, haunted downs, and the long afterlife of fallen realms. For though the war was won, the lost kingdoms remained lost. When men speak of fallen realms, they often imagine destruction as an ending, as though once a kingdom falls, its story is concluded. Yet ruins have lives of their own. They remember, they linger, and in the North, after the fall of Angmar, there remained a landscape shaped as much by memory as by loss. This, perhaps, is one of the most haunting chapters in the history of Arnor. For though the Dark Kingdom was broken, the old northern realm did not rise again in its former majesty. The heirs of kings endured, yes, but much of what had once been Arnor passed into ruin. There is sorrow in that, but also wonder. For the North became a country of echoes. Ancient roads still crossed lonely hills where few now travelled. Watchtowers stood broken against weather and time. Great works of forgotten kings lay hidden beneath moss, thorn, and silence. The world moved on around them, yet they remained, fragments of a nobler age. I have wandered such lands, and they possess a strange dignity. Ruins may seem silent to the hurried eye. To those who listen, they speak. There were the old capitals, diminished and abandoned. There were the weathered remnants of fortresses where kings once held court. There were lands where villages had long vanished, yet old boundaries lingered in the shape of roads, walls, and forgotten stones. And then there were the Barrow Downs. Few places in the North carry older sorrow. These ancient burial hills had once held the dead of noble lineages, hallowed places of remembrance. Yet after the wars of Angmar, darker things came there, and old sanctity was troubled. This too was part of Angmar's lingering wound, that even memory itself was not left wholly untouched. Such corruption after defeat is often the cruelest legacy of evil. Its armies may fall, its stain may remain, and yet even so the North was never wholly abandoned. The Dúnedain endured as rangers, guardians without crown, heirs without throne. Many who later walked safely in lands once threatened knew little of those who watched in secret. Yet much that survived in the North survived because they remained. I have long honored them, for there is a quiet heroism in preserving what no songs praise. The kingdoms were gone, the vigilance endured. There is something profoundly moving in that. A people reduced from kingship to hidden guardianship, yet not broken in purpose. Few histories honor such endurance enough, and the North itself seemed almost shaped for remembrance. Mist over empty hills, ancient roads disappearing into heather, ruined towers glimpsed at dusk. One can understand how later folk filled such places with tales, for landscapes touched by deep history often feel enchanted, whether by beauty or sorrow. Even the wild seemed to keep memory there, perhaps especially the wild. I have often thought abandoned kingdoms are not wholly dead, so long as their names are remembered. Fornost, Anuminas, Carn Dûm, broken names perhaps, but not forgotten. And in forgotten places sometimes wisdom sleeps. For the ruins of the north teach what living kingdoms often ignore, that greatness fades, that pride is fragile, yet that honor may outlast power. These are stern teachings, but good ones. And still, though Angmar had fallen and the north endured in diminished form, the story of the Witch King did not end there. For shadows driven out do not always perish. Sometimes they withdraw. Gather, return elsewhere. And so the Lord of Angmar, defeated in the north, turned at last southward, toward older darkness, toward Mordor, and there his tale entered a darker age still. Though Angmar was broken and its northern kingdom undone, it would be a grave mistake to think the fall of Angmar meant the end of the Witch King of Angmar. Some evils perish when their strongholds fall, others merely change shape. The Witch King was such a power. Defeat in the north did not destroy him, it displaced him. And there is a difference. I have often said that darkness seldom abandons purpose simply because one design has failed. It learns. It withdraws. It waits for another hour. So it was here. Driven from the north, the Witch King passed southward, and in that movement one may almost feel history pivot. For what had been chiefly a northern terror now returned to older shadows, to the service of Sauron, and the story of Angmar became bound ever more deeply to the wider fate of Middle-earth. This matters, for too often Angmar is treated as though separate from the greater wars. It was not. It was prelude, a dark rehearsal of things to come. In the ruin of Arnor, one sees methods later turned against all free peoples, division exploited, despair cultivated, kingdoms weakened from within before assaulted from without. The Witch King carried those lessons south, and in time he would become Lord of Minas Morgul, dreadful city once called Minas Ithil, a place whose very transformation tells much about the long patience of evil. I have always found there a grim symmetry. In the north he helped reduce kingdoms to ruin. In the south he took a city of moonlight and turned it into a fortress of dread. Corruption delights in such inversions. Beauty made monstrous. Memory turned to terror. That too is one of darkness's arts. Yet I would not have the Witch King mistaken for mere wandering horror. Even as servant he remained strategist, commander, architect of fear. His power after Angmar did not diminish. It broadened. And perhaps this is what makes the tale of Angmar so significant. It was not merely the story of a lost northern war. It was origin story to later catastrophe. The shadow that troubled Arnor would one day ride at the head of greater wars. And thus old history was never wholly past. It moved forward. I have lived long enough to see how often men treat old evils as though defeated things belong safely to memory. Rarely so. What is not understood often returns. And in the Witch King's southward departure, there was something ominous precisely because his story remained unfinished. One chapter closed, a darker one opened. In the north his kingdom became ruin, but his dread endured. And as years passed, his name itself grew into legend, half feared, half scarcely believed by many who knew only fragments of older histories. Yet legends have roots, and this one was terribly real. I have walked in lands where memories of Angmar lingered, and I have stood against powers shaped by the same dark will. There is continuity in such things. Shadows may wear different forms in different ages, yet often they spring from old sources. So the Lord of Angmar passed into the larger war against the West, and the Northern Kingdom became memory. But what memory? A whole realm raised for destruction, broken yet not meaningless, for even in defeat it cast influence far beyond its own life. There is a melancholy grandeur in that. For Angmar, though evil, belongs to the deep, tragic history of Middle-earth. It shows what darkness may build, and how even dark kingdoms leave ruins worth remembering. Yet to understand the Witch King fully, one must go beyond Angmar and ask how a mortal king became what he was. One of the Nazgûl, Lord of Terror, servant of the shadow. For kingdoms may rise from darkness, but darker still are the powers that shape kings into wraiths. To understand the fall of kingdoms, one must sometimes look beyond kingdoms, and so before this tale draws toward its end, we must speak more fully of the one who made Angmar possible. For the Witch King of Angmar did not begin as the shadow he became. Like all the Nazgûl, he was once a mortal ruler, a king among men in forgotten years, though his true name has long been lost to history. There is something profoundly tragic in that, to be remembered only by one's corruption, and not by one's beginning. He was among those who received the 9 rings given to mortal lords, gifts fair in appearance, ruinous in consequence. Much has been said of the rings and much misunderstood, but this much is clear: they did not enslave at once. Their corruption was gradual, as many dark things are. Power was offered, dominion enlarged, life unnaturally prolonged, and in accepting these, the bearers passed slowly from kingship into bondage. I have often thought evil most dangerous when it offers fulfillment before demanding surrender. So it was with the 9, and so mortal kings became ring wraiths. There is a deep lesson there. Not all falls come through sudden wickedness, some through temptation patiently embraced. The one who would become the Witch King rose chief among them, greatest of the Nazgûl, feared even among servants of shadow. By the time he founded Angmar, he was no longer merely a fallen king, but something altered. Will sharpened into malice, personality thinned into purpose, ancient ambition consumed by obedience to the One. And yet, even in such corruption, remnants of kingly nature remained in distorted form. This too is curious: his mastery of war, his patience, his understanding of kingdoms. These suggest not brute monstrosity alone, but darkened memory of what he once had been. Corruption often twists rather than erases. That is why it can be so terrible. In the long wars of Middle-earth, he became more than enemy commander. He became symbol of dread. Men feared not only his armies, but his presence. Such fear itself was weapon, and let none dismiss fear too lightly. It has undone many strong hearts. Yet I have seen also that fear confronted often weakens. This the free peoples learned, slowly, at cost. There is something almost sorrowful in considering what the Witch King might once have been. A ruler of men, perhaps noble in some forgotten beginning, drawn at length into ruin through hunger for power. Tolkien understood such tragedies well. Evil in his world is seldom merely monstrous. Often it is greatness corrupted, and perhaps nowhere among men is that clearer than in the Nazgûl. Yet whatever pity one grants beginnings, one must not mistake what the Witch King became. He was architect of horrors, destroyer of northern realms, terror before Minas Tirith. His shadow fell across ages. Still, even his story bore a limit. This matters, for dark powers often seem invincible until the hour they are not. Much was foretold concerning him, as I have spoken, including words uttered by Glorfindel after the fall of Angmar, that he would not fall by the hand of man. Many later misunderstood this as invulnerability. Prophecy often suffers from literal minds. It meant something subtler, and its fulfillment, when it came, belonged to courage in unexpected forms. To Eowyn, to Meriadoc Brandybuck, there is poetry in that. The Lord who had broken kingdoms undone not by the might he expected, but by those he overlooked. I have always found in that one of the profound moral patterns of our history. Pride blinds evil, and often makes its downfall possible. So even in telling of Angmar, we glimpse already its deeper meaning. Dark kingdoms rise, dark lords gather power, yet none are ultimate. Even shadows have boundaries, and perhaps that is why this tale, though filled with ruin, is not despairing. For it remembers also that darkness, however ancient, may be resisted. Still, before we end, there remains a question worth asking. If Angmar rose through malice and fell through war, what truly caused its ruin? For kingdoms, even evil ones, do not perish by one battle alone. And in that question lies perhaps the deepest lesson of Angmar. Many would answer simply that Angmar fell because it was defeated at Fornost, and in one sense this is true. Battles do shape history. Yet no kingdom, whether noble or dark, rises or perishes for one cause alone. There are deeper currents beneath such endings, and if one would understand why Angmar fell, one must look beneath the battlefields. Its strength was formidable, but it possessed within itself the weakness common to many realms founded upon destruction. It knew how to ruin others. It did not know how to create anything enduring beyond domination. This is a subtle distinction, though a profound one. There is a kind of power that grows by nurturing, another that grows only by consuming. The second often appears terrible in strength, yet it contains its own fragility. Angmar was such a kingdom. Its unity depended upon fear, conquest, and the will of one dark lord. Such powers can compel obedience, but they do not inspire loyalty of the kind that survives hardship. I have long believed that kingdoms held together only by terror may seem strong, yet are brittle beneath the surface. For fear binds poorly when fortunes change, and fortunes always change. This was one reason Angmar could not endure. Another lay in the very patience that made it formidable. The Witch King waged a long war of attrition against divided enemies and with terrible success. Yet he relied too greatly on the assumption that what had weakened over generations could not gather strength again. Darkness often mistakes weariness for surrender. It is a costly error, for the North, though diminished, remembered alliance. And when aid came from Gondor, when old friendships stirred, Angmar faced something it had long labored to prevent: unity. This matters more than armies alone. Often kingdoms are saved when divided peoples remember common cause. Angmar fell in part because what it sought to undo returned against it. There is almost justice in that. Yet I think there was deeper failure still. The Witch King understood strategy. He understood fear. He understood how to break kingdoms. But like many servants of shadow, he misunderstood hope. This is no small philosophical point. It is often the fatal blindness of evil. Hope may survive in smaller embers than darkness believes, in hidden lineages, in battered kingdoms, in forgotten oaths. And because it survives, designs built upon despair are never as secure as they appear. Angmar mistook ruin for finality. It was wrong. I've often reflected too that evil kingdoms carry inward contradictions. They seek order through domination, yet domination breeds distrust. They pursue permanence through force, yet force alone rarely preserves what it builds. They gather strength by corruption, yet corruption corrodes even what employs it. Thus darkness often contains seeds of its own undoing. This was true of Angmar, and perhaps of all such realms. Even its landscape speaks to this. Consider Carn Dûm, once dread seat of power, now remembered chiefly as ruin. What was raised to erase kingdoms became itself a lost kingdom. There is something almost poetic in that reversal, a stern poetry, one Tolkien understood deeply. For in his histories evil often overreaches, and in overreaching prepares defeat. Yet let us not romanticize this. Angmar's fall did not erase the suffering it caused. Arnor was not restored. The dead did not return. Ruins remained. Victory does not always undo tragedy. It only prevents deeper tragedy. That too is wisdom. And perhaps why the tale of Angmar is not merely one of darkness defeated, but of costly preservation. The North survived, though scarred, though diminished. And perhaps many of the greatest victories in history are of that kind, not glorious restoration. Revival. I find something noble in that. And if one asks, then why Angmar truly fell, I would answer thus. Because kingdoms built only upon fear cannot wholly withstand peoples bound by memory, alliance, and hope. In the end, those proved stronger. And when one has understood this, one may begin to see even ruins differently. For ruins are not always monuments to defeat. Sometimes they are witnesses. And Angmar's ruins have much yet to say. There is a habit among many to look upon ruins and see only endings. Broken towers, fallen gates, weathered stones swallowed by earth. These seem to speak of failure, of things lost beyond recall. Yet I have wandered too long through the old places of Middle-earth to believe ruins mean only death. Often they preserve more faithfully than living kingdoms what ought not be forgotten. So it is with the remnants of Angmar and the lost North. For ruins remember, not in speech perhaps, but in presence. One feels it in abandoned roads still tracing old intentions through empty hills. In watchtowers that no longer guard, yet still stand as if refusing oblivion. In stones shaped by hands long dead, remaining after crowns and armies have passed away. Such things carry memory in another form. And memory, even in broken things, is a kind of endurance. I have often thought this one of the quieter beauties in the histories of Middle-earth, that loss is rarely presented as emptiness alone. Even sorrow leaves inheritance. The ruined cities of Arnor teach this. For Nos does not speak only of a kingdom fallen, but of resistance. A numinous recalls old majesty, yes, but also continuity, for memory of it endured even when its halls lay silent. The old watch hills, the broken roads, the barrow downs, each in its own way bears witness. And witness matters, especially in an age quick to forget. There is wisdom in old ruins because they humble the living. They remind kings their works are not eternal. They remind peoples that greatness may fade, But they remind us too that what was noble need not vanish merely because it is no longer dominant. This is a profound distinction. Too often men confuse survival with visibility, yet much endures unseen. The Dúnedain Rangers were proof of this. Hidden, wandering, little recognized, they carried forward more of Arnor than many realized. In them the kingdom survived not in towers but in duty. That is a beautiful thing. A kingdom reduced to character. I've always admired that. And even Angmar's own ruins, dark though their memory is, teach something. For they stand as warning. Some places preserve what ought not be repeated. Ruins may instruct as well as inspire. There are lessons in fallen evil, no less than fallen splendor. Pride overreaches. Fear cannot found permanence. Malice consumes what serves it. These too are written in broken stone. Sometimes I think the whole North is a kind of book, though few read it. Wind over the downs, cold stars above ancient roads, ruins hidden beneath heather. Each page speaks. One need only linger long enough to hear. This is perhaps why I've never considered wandering wasted. To walk old places is to converse with history. And history, when listened to patiently, often softens pride and deepens understanding. There is peace in that, even amid ruins, especially amid ruins, for ruins teach that not all broken things are without hope. Some await renewal. Indeed, in later ages, the line of kings returned in Aragorn, and with him old realms stirred again. Even this belongs in distant way to the story of Arnor. Ruin was not final. How often that proves true. What seems lost beyond recovery may yet sleep. And awaken, there is comfort in such thought. For all people suffer seasons of diminishment. All may learn from the North. And perhaps this is what endures most in ruins. Not sorrow, though there is sorrow. Not warning alone, though warning remains. But perspective, a reminder that history is longer than catastrophe. That shadows pass. That memory keeps faith. That what is worth preserving may survive in humbler forms until its hour returns. I think this in the end is among Tolkien's deepest themes. Not that darkness does not wound, but that it does not have final word. And if that is true of kingdoms, perhaps it is true of many things. So when you think of Angmar, do not think only of dread and war. Think too of what remained after. The ruins, the memory, the endurance hidden within loss. For these too are part of the tale. And before we close, there remains only one final question. What does the story of Angmar mean? What should be remembered when the Dark Kingdom, its wars and its ruins have all been told? For every old history, if worth hearing, leaves more than knowledge. It leaves wisdom. If one were to hear only of war, ruins and the fall of kingdoms, one might think the story of Angmar a chronicle of darkness alone. Yet no history in Middle-earth is preserved merely because of what happened. It is preserved because of what may be learned. And if Angmar still speaks across ages, it is because its rise and ruin reveal truths larger than one lost kingdom. First among these is a lesson often forgotten. Darkness is seldom strongest when it appears most violent. It is often strongest when unnoticed. Angmar did not begin in great visible terror. It began in division unhealed, in vigilance weakened, in enemies underestimated. That is how many dangers enter the world. Quietly, gradually, under the pretense of lesser concerns. There is wisdom in recognizing this, for evil often comes first as neglect, only later as catastrophe. A second lesson lies in the fate of Arnor. Divided kingdoms are vulnerable kingdoms. This is not only political truth, but moral one. When common cause is forgotten, when pride overcomes kinship, shadow finds openings. The northern wars show this plainly. Angmar did not create every weakness it exploited. Some existed already. This does not lessen evil's guilt, but it warns the free not to aid darkness through their own fragmentation. I have seen this lesson repeat through ages. It is rarely obsolete. And yet the tale does not end in warning. It offers hope also, for if Angmar teaches how darkness advances, it teaches too how darkness is resisted, through alliance remembered, through courage sustained over generations, through hope refusing extinction. Often men look for dramatic deliverance and overlook the quieter powers by which evil is truly overcome. Patience, faithfulness, endurance. These are not lesser strengths. They are often decisive ones. I have often thought the North survived not because it possessed greater might than Angmar, but because enough among the free refused surrender of spirit. This matters deeply, for much in Tolkien's world turns not on overwhelming force, but on perseverance. A humble but profound truth. There is another lesson too, sterner perhaps. Angmar teaches that evil may build kingdoms but cannot make them whole. It may organize, dominate, terrify. Yet something in such realms remains hollow, because they create no loyalty, not rooted in fear. And what rests only on fear does not endure. This is why dark empires seem mighty and pass, while things gentler survive them. I have always found comfort in that. Even the story of the Witch King contains warning of another kind, that corruption often begins in legitimate desire turned inward. Hunger for power, hunger for security, hunger for mastery. None seem monstrous at first. Yet when they cease serving wisdom and begin serving domination, ruin follows. This is no lesson only for kings. It concerns all hearts. Perhaps that is why old stories matter. They show inward truths through outward events. And then there is the lesson of ruins, which we have spoken of. That loss need not be meaningless, that what falls may still instruct. That memory itself may be a form of resistance against oblivion. I would not have this underestimated. To remember well is moral act. Indeed, many evils depend upon forgetfulness. Angmar hoped to erase kingdoms. It failed in part because memory endured. That too is victory. And perhaps greatest of all, Angmar teaches something about limits. Even ancient shadows have boundaries. However vast evil appears in its hour, it is not ultimate. This is woven through all the great tales. Morgoth himself was cast down. Sauron did not reign forever. The Witch King fell. Angmar became ruined. Darkness is powerful. It is not sovereign. There is profound hope in that. And if I were asked what one should carry from the tale of Angmar, I might answer thus. Guard unity. Distrust the slow poisons of division. Do not mistake silence for safety. And never believe shadows permanent simply because they seem ancient. For they are not. History proves otherwise. And perhaps this above all. Even the coldest kingdoms of winter cannot wholly overcome peoples who remember, endure, and keep faith. That was true in the north. It remains true. And having come this far through dark histories and haunted lands, only one thing remains before we let the northern winds grow quiet, to speak not of Angmar's lessons, but of what remains when even dark chronicles come to rest. When one has spoken long of fallen kingdoms, winter wars, ruined towers, and shadows that once seemed vast enough to swallow the north, one may be tempted to think the tale of Angmar ends in gloom. Yet that would be a poor reading of history. For though Angmar was born in darkness, and though it brought grievous ruin, it did not endure. That is not a small thing. It is perhaps the central truth. Darkness often seeks to appear eternal. It rarely is. There was a time when the Witch King seemed unconquerable in the north, when the heirs of Elendil appeared near broken, when old capitals fell silent and roads of kings grew desolate. To those living in such years, despair may well have seemed wisdom. Yet history did not consent to despair. The north endured. Scarred, yes. Diminished, yes. But not extinguished. And I have often thought that is how many of the greatest victories in Middle-earth truly appear. Not as unshadowed triumph, but as endurance wrested from near ruin. There is nobility in that, more perhaps than in easy victories. Consider what remained after Angmar passed. The line of kings, though hidden, survived. The rangers watched in forgotten labors. Ancient memory was preserved, and in later ages the broken thread of Arnor was woven again. What once seemed lost returned. How often hope works thus, quietly, slowly, against expectation. Even the ruins of Angmar now stand not as monuments to its power, but to its passing. This too has always struck me deeply. Carn Dûm does not proclaim victory. It proclaims limit. A dark kingdom that sought to erase others became itself a memory half buried in snow and legend. There is justice in that, and perhaps warning too. For all tyrannies imagine themselves enduring. Very few do. I have lived long enough to trust this. The shadow rises. The shadow passes, again and again. That rhythm belongs to the world while it lasts. And if this tale leaves one image in the mind, let it not be only black towers under winter stars, nor battlefields strewn with ruin. Let it be this instead: dawn over the old north after long storm, frost melting from broken stones, light touching abandoned watchtowers, and silence no longer haunted, but peaceful. There is healing even for wounded lands. Time does not forget, yet it also restores. This is one of the gentlest truths hidden in old histories, and perhaps one reason they are worth telling before sleep. For they remind us that no darkness is ultimate. Not Angmar, not Mordor, not any shadow men may fear in their own age. Even darkness passes. I would have those words remembered, for they are not merely comfort, they are history. And so the story of Angmar, though born in cold ruin, ends not in dread but in perspective. A kingdom of winter rose and fell. The free endured, memory outlasted terror, and that in the end is stronger magic than any dark sorcery. For memory joined to hope is difficult indeed to conquer. Now the old northern wars grow quiet. The ruined towers recede into mist. The cold stars turn above forgotten roads, and the shadowed kingdom is left behind, where history has placed it. Now let the old wars of the north grow distant. Let the iron crowns, the fallen fortresses, and the cold banners of Angmar pass back into memory where they belong. Their tale has been told, and there is no need now to wander further through ruins tonight. Let the mind leave battlefields behind and walk instead beneath the stillness that remains after history has spoken. Imagine the northern wilds not in war but in quiet, snow lying softly upon ancient hills, the wind moving through forgotten passes, moonlight silver upon old stones where kingdoms once stood. The silence there is no longer one of dread but of rest. Even ruined lands sleep beneath the stars. Let the towers of Fornos fade into mist. Let the cold heights beyond Carn Dûm soften into dream. Let old roads disappear beneath drifting snow until nothing remains but peace and distant starlight. There is gentleness even in the north. Listen for it. The hush after wind, the faint murmur of winter over empty moors, the calm of lands long healed from war. Let those sounds carry you now. Leave behind dark kings and ancient shadows. Leave behind the burdens of long memory. Let the old chronicles close as one might close an old leather-bound book beside a dying fire. There is no enemy at the gate, no watch to keep, only rest. If your thoughts still wander among ruined kingdoms, let them wander gently. Walk as traveler, not exile. Let the Barrow Downs lie quiet beneath moon and mist. Let ancient stars shine over Arnor as they did before Angmar rose, and as they shall long after all dark kingdoms are forgotten. There is comfort in such ancient things. The stars outlive shadows, always, and so breathe deeply. Let the northern wind grow softer. Let the mind grow still as snow upon old stone. Let sleep come as quietly as frost settling before dawn. And if before dreams fully take you, you imagine distant echoes in the cold, perhaps old horns long silent or footsteps upon forgotten roads, do not be troubled. It is only memory passing softly. The north keeping its ancient watch. Rest now beneath the northern stars. Sleep while old kingdoms dream, and let even Angmar fade into peace. And before I leave you to the hush of winter wind and the music of the north, let me thank you for walking with me through these old and shadowed histories. You have listened not merely to the tale of Angmar, but to the memory of kingdoms long fallen, to warnings preserved in ruins, and to the quiet hope that endured after darkness passed. Few linger long enough to hear the whole of an old tale. Fewer still sit patiently beside forgotten histories until their deeper wisdom reveals itself. For that you have my gratitude. Now I shall leave you with gentler sounds. The wind over the northern hills, soft snowfall over ruined watchtowers, perhaps the distant murmur of music such as might be heard in the hidden halls of Rivendell while the world beyond sleeps. Rest now, restore your strength, for even the wisest know that thought grows clearer after deep rest, and even the strongest spirits are renewed in quiet. There is no shame in stillness. Indeed, many battles are better faced after peace has first been gathered inward. Remember this, even those who stand against darkness must sometimes lay aside burden. The vigilant also sleep, the wanderer also rest, and those who would endure long roads must not despise renewal. So let sleep be not retreat but restoration. Let your strength return like dawn after winter. For often the truest resilience is born not in struggle, but in recovery. And should you carry anything from these old northern chronicles, let it be this: no shadow is endless, no winter eternal, and no weary heart beyond the comfort of rest. Sleep now, gather calm, renew courage, for tomorrow's roads are better traveled by those who have rested well. And until we meet again for another old tale of Middle-earth, whether of kings, lost realms, forgotten battles, or songs half remembered by the world. May wisdom walk beside you, may starlight guide your road, and may you wake strengthened for whatever fields lie ahead. Until the next story, rest beneath the ancient stars, and good night. Now listen, the northern wind has begun.